The hum of the courtroom felt oppressive, like a heavy cloak draped over my shoulders. I sat rigidly in my seat, my hands clenched tightly in my lap, as Tanya's face haunted the edges of my mind, a haunting loop of the woman I had once called my wife. Or perhaps, more truthfully, the woman I thought I knew. The divorce proceedings had been a battlefield from the start. Her lawyers, sharp as vultures, circled every fragment of the life we had built together, eager to pick it apart. Their strategy was obvious. Paint me as the villain, the architect of our marriage's demise. I had braced myself for this, but preparation didn't soften the blow. For 4 long months, I had been living in limbo. No sleep, barely eating, just surviving. When I first heard she had moved on, I assumed it was a relocation, maybe back to her mother's house. But I was wrong. She hadn't just moved on, she had moved on, with someone else. Today, though, was different. Today, Tanya would have to look me in the eye and face the accusations I had leveled against her. The word adultery felt like a lash every time I thought it. Whispering it to my lawyer had been agony, not because it was untrue, but because admitting it made it real. When Tanya spoke, her voice was calm, steady, as if the weight of the truth didn't touch her. "I have nothing to hide, Your Honor," she said, her gaze unwavering, never straying in my direction. I wanted to scream, to rip through the polished facade she had so carefully constructed. How could she sit there, so composed, after everything? Her audacity was like a slap in the face. Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, leaned toward me, his expression reassuring. "Stay calm," his nod seemed to say. I tried to breathe deeply, to trust in the process. He had assured me the evidence was undeniable. The private investigator, Mr. Ramirez, had done his job thoroughly. I had only skimmed the report, unable to stomach all of it, but I had seen enough to know the truth would come out. Then the courtroom door opened. A tall man with a serious expression and weary eyes stepped inside. Mr. Ramirez. He carried a simple manila envelope, but the weight of its contents could topple a world. Tanya noticed him immediately. For the first time that day, her composure cracked. Her face paled, her hands trembled, and a small involuntary gasp escaped her lips. It was as though a mask had been ripped away, revealing the truth beneath. In that moment, the tight, cold knot that had lodged in my chest began to loosen. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was the first crack in the wall she had built around her lies. Mr. Ramirez walked to the witness stand with quiet purpose, led by Mr. Thompson. He was sworn in, stated his name, and began detailing his findings with clinical precision. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who looked as though she'd heard every story imaginable, leaned forward, her stern face unyielding. The courtroom held its breath, as if the walls themselves awaited the truth. Mr. Ramirez spoke with a calm, almost clinical precision, recounting a narrative that felt pulled from the pages of a spy novel. He described intercepted messages, clandestine rendezvous in forgotten corners of the city, and covert meetings in dimly lit hotel rooms. Every word was like a hammer striking an anvil, forging my anger anew. Though I had long suspected Tanya's betrayal, hearing it laid bare in such methodical detail was like being wounded afresh. The name Jerome cut through me like a blade. A friend of a friend, someone I had shared casual conversations with, someone who had stood close enough to be part of my circle. The realization that she had carried out this deception so brazenly, so openly, while I remained oblivious, burned like salt in an open wound. I watched Tanya as Mr. Ramirez continued, his words steady and unrelenting. Her skin flushed crimson, the color creeping up her neck to stain her cheeks. She squirmed in her chair, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve, and finally, her wide, pleading eyes darted toward me. What I saw there was not regret but panic, a desperate attempt to salvage what little remained of her crumbling facade. The courtroom fell silent as Mr. Thompson, my lawyer, presented the photographs. Approved by the judge, they moved through the room, one set of hands at a time. First the judge, then the bailiff, then her lawyer, and finally, Tanya herself. The photos were not explicit. They didn't need to be. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the intimate body language. They were louder than words, screaming the story of her betrayal. For me, they transformed fragments of suspicion into a vivid, undeniable tapestry of treachery. Tanya refused to look at the evidence. Her lawyer, who just moments ago had brimmed with arrogance, now sat in subdued silence. The courtroom's gaze fell on her, heavy with expectation. When she finally spoke, Her voice was fragile, trembling. These are taken out of context, she stammered, her words halting and uncertain. They aren't what they seem. A bitter laugh escaped me. A sharp, joyless sound. Don't insult everyone's intelligence, Tanya, I snapped, my voice low but cutting. You've destroyed everything. You have no idea what you've done. She flinched but said nothing. Mr. Thompson pressed on. Mrs. Carter, can you explain the repeated stays at the Ocean View Hotel under the alias Mr. and Mrs. Davis's? Or the text messages to Jerome, recovered despite your attempts to delete them? Tanya's silence was deafening. She stared at the floor, her shoulders hunched under the weight of her guilt. The judge, her expression solemn, broke the quiet. Mrs. Carter, do you have anything to say for yourself? When Tanya finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with the weight of her shattered confidence. I don't know what to say. In that moment, I saw her for what she truly was. A stranger wearing the face of the woman I had once loved. The person I had vowed to spend my life with had been nothing more than a phantom, a lie conjured to disguise her deceit. The judge ruled in my favor. The divorce would proceed with equitable distribution, a cold but fitting end to the story of our fractured union. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a validation of my pain, an acknowledgement of her betrayal. As I left the courtroom, I saw her lingering near the entrance. Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped. The bravado that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a smallness, a pathetic air of defeat. For a moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. Then, just as quickly, it faded, leaving only a hollow sadness. I walked past her without a word, without a glance. The bitterness in my chest remained, a cold weight I knew would take time to dissolve. But for the first time in months, I could breathe. Each inhale felt like a step toward healing, each exhale a release of anger and pain. The sunlight outside was blinding, a sharp contrast to the dim, suffocating atmosphere of the courtroom. As I stepped into the brightness, I realized I was free, truly, finally free. There would be no triumph in this ending, no joy. Only a quiet resolve to rebuild what had been broken, to move forward with the hard-earned wisdom of this experience. It would be a long road, but I was ready to walk it, one step at a time. And as I left her behind, a ghost of the woman she had pretended to be, I knew this, I deserved better. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I would find it.